Her investigation exposed his client and their secret. The door to the bar closed behind Sebastian without a sound, the lock recognizing his membership before any human ever would. There was no sign outside, no schedule, no digital footprint. The place existed in the negative space of the city, a refuge for people whose lives would collapse if their conversations ever surfaced. Sebastian had chosen it years ago for that exact reason. He removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, as if even the smallest gesture needed to be controlled. His suit was immaculate, tailored to precision, a uniform that reminded everyone who looked at him that he belonged to the upper tier of consequence. Inside, the lighting was low enough to blur faces but bright enough to identify threats. Mirrors lined the walls at irregular angles, forcing every patron to see themselves fractured and multiplied. Sebastian noted exits, reflections, body language. Habit. Survival. Isla sat where she always did, back to the wall, spine relaxed but ready, one ankle hooked lightly around the leg of her chair. She looked like someone waiting for a friend, which was the most dangerous disguise of all. Her hair was tied back, exposing her neck in a way that would have looked careless to anyone who didn't know her. Sebastian did. Isla Sterling never did anything without calculation. He approached without urgency, placing himself in her line of sight only at the last moment. She didn't look surprised. She never was. He took the seat opposite her, aligning his posture to mirror hers just enough to look coincidental. Their knees were close, but not touching. The distance was intentional, measured down to centimeters. The bartender appeared as if summoned by thought alone and placed 2 glasses on the table. No words. No eye contact. Isla reached for hers first, fingers steady, nails short, practical. Sebastian waited half a second longer before doing the same. Timing mattered. Everything did. You changed your route, Isla said quietly, eyes fixed on the surface of her drink. Construction, he replied. Or surveillance. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. Both, I imagine. The air between them tightened, charged with what they weren't saying. Their relationship lived in these pauses, in sentences that sounded harmless but carried weight beneath them. Around them, other patrons spoke in hushed tones, fragments of power drifting through the room. Legal loopholes, political favors, corporate funerals disguised as mergers. Isla leaned back, crossing her arms, her gaze shifting to the mirror behind the bar. Hardy was in the city today, she said, tone casual, almost bored. Sebastian's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the glass. He's always somewhere, he answered. That's his talent. No, she corrected softly. His talent is knowing where everyone else is. That earned her a glance. Brief, sharp, loaded with warning. Hardy's name was never just a name. It was gravity. Sebastian had built his career orbiting that gravity, had learned to move precisely enough not to be pulled in too close or flung out entirely. Isla knew this. She also knew what it cost him. She shifted her foot under the table, brushing against the polished leather of his shoe. The contact was light, accidental to any observer, devastating to both of them. Sebastian didn't move, but his breathing changed, just enough for her to notice. We shouldn't linger, he said. People remember patterns. Isla tilted her head, studying his reflection rather than his face. So do journalists, she replied. Silence followed, thick and deliberate. This was the ritual part, the moment where they reaffirmed the rules that kept them alive. Sebastian lowered his voice even further. If anything happens, he said, we were never here together. Isla's jaw tightened. If anyone ever connects us, she said, I'll deny you exist. He nodded once, accepting it as both a lie and a promise. Around them, glasses were refilled, deals were whispered into existence, lives were quietly rearranged. Isla drained her drink and stood, smoothing her jacket, already transforming back into the public version of herself. Same arrangement, she said. No messages, no traces. Sebastian watched her reflection as she moved toward the door, aware of every eye that followed her, every calculation being made. Be careful, he said, the words stripped of emotion by necessity. She paused with her hand on the door. You first, she replied, and then she was gone, absorbed by the city that pretended not to see people like them. Sebastian remained seated long after her absence became noticeable, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. He knew this ritual couldn't last forever. Secrets never did. And somewhere beyond the walls of the bar, forces were already aligning to test just how expensive silence could become. Isla didn't go home right away. That alone should have warned her that something was wrong. She took the long route through streets where cameras were old, half-blind, their lenses clouded by neglect or deliberate budget cuts. The city at this hour felt alert but indifferent, like a machine that kept moving regardless of who got caught in its gears. She stopped once to buy coffee she didn't drink, once more to stand in front of a closed bookstore and check her reflection in the dark glass. No one obvious followed her, which worried her more than if they had. When she finally entered her apartment building, she didn't take the elevator. Stairs meant noise, friction, unpredictability. Her phone stayed in her pocket, powered off, battery physically removed. Old habits from older stories, the kind that never quite let go of you. Inside her apartment, the silence felt wrong. Too clean. Isla stood still for a full minute, listening to the hum of electricity in the walls, the distant traffic, her own breathing. Nothing out of place. That was the problem. She locked the door, bolted it, then crossed to the desk by the window where her laptop waited exactly as she had left it. The envelope was there too. Brown paper, no return address, slipped under her door while she'd been out. She hadn't noticed it earlier because it hadn't been there. Isla didn't touch it immediately. She washed her hands first, slow and thorough, as if cleanliness could ward off consequences. Only then did she open the envelope, careful not to tear it. Inside was a flash drive and a single folded sheet of paper. No handwriting, just a printed string of characters and a timestamp from 2 days earlier. She recognized the format instantly. Encrypted archive, not amateur work. The kind of thing that came from people who assumed betrayal was inevitable and prepared for it in advance. Her pulse steadied instead of spiking. Fear came later. First came focus. Isla plugged the flash drive into a laptop that had never known the internet. The decryption took longer than she liked, layers unfolding like a locked puzzle box. When the files finally appeared, her breath left her all at once. Shell companies nested inside charitable foundations. Political donations routed through media acquisitions. Settlements paid quietly to make entire investigations evaporate. Hardy's fingerprints were everywhere, not blatant, not sloppy, but unmistakable if you knew how to look. This wasn't rumor or inference. This was architecture, a system designed to exploit laws while pretending to respect them. Isla leaned back, rubbing her eyes, already thinking in headlines, timelines, angles of exposure. Then Sebastian's face intruded, uninvited. Not his expression from the bar, but the way his jaw tightened when Hardy's name surfaced. The way he carried responsibility like a second spine. If she published this, really published it, there would be no firewall thick enough to protect him. He was Hardy's chief legal shield, the man who turned moral disasters into contractual inconveniences. Even if Sebastian claimed ignorance, the world would not care. Guilt by proximity was faster than truth. Isla closed the files and stared at the dark screen. She had chased stories her entire career, knowing they would cost her something. Access, comfort, safety. This was different. This would cost someone else everything. Her phone vibrated once in the other room, sharp and sudden, making her flinch despite herself. She didn't answer it. She already knew who it would be if she did. Instead, she opened the archive again, this time slower, more methodical, mapping the damage instead of savoring it. She copied the files, split them, hid them in places that required memory rather than passwords. By the time dawn began to thin the darkness outside her window, Isla had accepted the truth she'd been circling since the first file opened. The archive wasn't just a story. It was a weapon, and weapons, once found, demanded to be used. The question wasn't whether she would publish. The question was how to do it without destroying the one person who had never asked her to be careful, only honest. Sebastian noticed the change in the room before Isla said anything. It wasn't a sound or a movement, but a subtle tightening of the air, the way silence sharpened when something unspoken demanded space. They were sitting across from each other at the narrow kitchen table, the kind that looked temporary even when it had stood there for years. Isla's laptop was open but untouched, its screen dimmed, forgotten. Her attention was no longer on him, but on a single printed page she had pulled from a thin folder and placed between them like evidence in a trial that had not yet begun. She didn't push it toward him. She simply tapped the paper once with her finger and waited. Sebastian didn't ask what it was. He leaned forward, adjusted his cuff without realizing it, and read. At first glance, it looked harmless. A column of numbers. Quarterly totals. A familiar structure, almost comforting in its order. Hardy's empire thrived on reports like this, thousands of them, clean, polished, designed to reassure investors and bury doubt. Sebastian had signed off on dozens just like it. But Isla had circled one figure in red ink. A single number, precise to the decimal. Sebastian felt the slow, unpleasant recognition before he consciously understood why his chest tightened. That number was wrong. Not exaggerated, not rounded, not creatively interpreted. It was structurally impossible. It broke the internal logic of the report. He recalculated it in his head automatically, years of habit taking over, and arrived at a different result within seconds. His jaw tightened. Isla watched him closely, her expression unreadable, sharp eyes scanning his face for the exact moment comprehension landed. When it did, she spoke quietly. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded tired. They moved the liability off book, she said. But they forgot to rebalance the projection model. That number shouldn't exist. Sebastian leaned back slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. His first instinct was denial, not because the evidence was weak, but because accepting it meant accepting what it implied about his own role. Hardy didn't make mistakes like this by accident. Either someone under him had panicked, or someone believed the report would never be read by anyone who understood it. Someone like Isla, or someone like Sebastian, if he allowed himself to see. This doesn't prove intent, he said automatically, the lawyer's reflex slipping out before he could stop it. Isla nodded once, as if she had expected that response. I know, she replied. That's why I didn't publish it. That gave him pause. He looked at her again, really looked this time, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled slightly against the table, restrained, controlled. Isla didn't sit on stories like this unless there was a reason. There's more, she continued. She reached into the folder and pulled out another page, then another, spreading them carefully, methodically, like laying out a map. Each page contained fragments, internal emails, partial spreadsheets, timestamps stripped of context. On their own, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern Sebastian had seen before in courtrooms, in closed-door negotiations, in cases where the truth was never supposed to surface. A deliberate obfuscation, a financial narrative engineered to collapse only after the right people had exited clean. You were hired to contain fallout, Isla said, her voice steady. Not to prevent it. To make sure when it comes, it doesn't touch him. Sebastian's phone vibrated in his pocket. The timing was so precise it felt staged. He didn't take it out immediately. He already knew who it was. Hardy didn't call when he wanted answers. He called when he wanted to remind people who controlled the board. The phone vibrated again. Isla watched him, her expression hardening, not with anger, but with clarity. Is that him? She asked. Sebastian finally pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. Hardy's name glowed back at him, calm, confident, inevitable. He didn't answer. The vibration stopped. For a moment, the apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside, the city indifferent to the quiet crisis unfolding in a borrowed kitchen. They're listening, Sebastian said finally. He hadn't planned to say it out loud. The words escaped him before caution could intervene. Isla's eyes narrowed. Listening how? She asked. Sebastian didn't respond immediately. He stood, crossed the room, and placed his phone face down on the counter, then did the same with hers without asking permission. He lowered his voice, not because it would help, but because instinct demanded it. Not here, he said. Not yet. But soon. You don't show someone like Hardy a weakness without consequences. Isla absorbed that, her jaw tightening. So you believe me, she said. It wasn't a question. Sebastian exhaled slowly. Belief was the wrong word. Belief implied choice. This was recognition. The kind that rearranged priorities whether you wanted it to or not. Yes, he said. I do. That admission cost him more than he let show. Because believing her meant acknowledging that he had been maneuvered. That his reputation, his spotless record, his carefully maintained distance from scandal had been calculated into Hardy's strategy from the start. He was not the firewall. He was the exit route. Isla studied him for a long moment, as if recalibrating her understanding of him in real time. Then we're both compromised, she said quietly. Sebastian met her gaze. For the first time since this began, He didn't deflect, didn't retreat into legal abstraction. Yes, he replied, which means we have to be very careful about what we say next. Isla reached into the folder again, but this time she didn't pull out another document. She pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table toward him without looking at it. Sebastian unfolded it. 2 words were written in tight, deliberate handwriting. No phones. He felt something shift then, subtle but irreversible. A line crossed. Not into romance. Not yet, but into trust. The kind that formed not from comfort, but from shared danger. Sebastian folded the note carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. When he looked back at Isla, his expression had changed. The detached composure she had known was still there, but beneath it was something harder, sharper. Resolve. If they're monitoring digital channels, he said, then we assume everything electronic is compromised. From this point on, we communicate analog. Isla's mouth twitched, just barely. I knew there was a reason I kept old notebooks, she said. Sebastian stood again, scanning the room, already thinking in contingencies, exits, delays. He wasn't Hardy's lawyer in that moment. He was something else entirely. A man choosing a side, fully aware of the cost. You shouldn't be alone tonight, he said. Isla raised an eyebrow. Is that legal advice or personal concern? For the first time since he walked into her apartment, Sebastian allowed himself a thin, honest smile. At this point, he replied, I'm not sure there's a difference. Sebastian didn't announce his arrival the second time. He let himself into Isla's apartment with the same quiet precision he used when entering closed courtrooms after hours, places where silence mattered more than authority. Isla watched him from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, eyes alert. There was no greeting, no small talk. Whatever they had crossed in the previous hours had stripped them of the illusion that politeness still served a purpose. Sebastian closed the door behind him, locked it, then locked it again, slower, listening to the mechanism engage. He set his coat down carefully, as if the fabric itself might betray them if mishandled. Don't speak unless I ask you something that requires an answer, he said calmly. It wasn't a command. It was an instruction built on experience. Isla nodded once. Sebastian moved through the apartment methodically, not searching so much as listening. He ran his fingers lightly along the underside of the kitchen counter, behind the power strip, along the window frame. He paused at the smoke detector, tilted his head, and removed it with practiced ease. Nothing. He continued into the living room, checking the bookshelf, the router, the television ports. Isla followed at a distance, resisting the urge to comment, watching the transformation in him. This was not the composed legal mind she had known in public. This was a man accustomed to operating in hostile environments without witnesses. When he reached the bedroom, he slowed. The room was smaller, more personal, cluttered with signs of a life lived at speed. Notebooks stacked near the bed, a jacket draped over a chair, her phone charger coiled like a habit she couldn't break. Sebastian scanned the room, then crouched near the nightstand. He lifted it slightly, adjusted the angle of the lamp, and his expression changed. It was subtle, but Isla saw it. He reached behind the outlet plate and removed a device no larger than a coin, matte black, designed to disappear against shadow. He didn't show it to her. He didn't curse. He simply held it between his fingers for a second, then crushed it against the metal frame of the bed with a sharp, controlled motion. The sound was barely audible. He killed the lights immediately after. The room dropped into darkness. Before Isla could react, Sebastian stepped forward and pulled her against him, one hand steady at the small of her back, the other cupping her shoulder. His mouth was close to her ear, his breath controlled, deliberate. We're in the game, he whispered. The words were quiet, but their meaning hit harder than any raised voice could have. Isla felt the tension in his body, the restraint layered over something dangerously close to anger. She didn't pull away. She understood now that closeness wasn't intimacy in that moment. It was cover. They stayed like that for several seconds, unmoving, letting the darkness do its work. When Sebastian finally released her, he didn't step back far. He turned the light on again, his expression reset, composed, but something had shifted permanently. They're not amateurs, he said, which means they're confident. Confidence creates patterns. Isla swallowed. How long? She asked. Sebastian glanced at the crushed device. Days, he replied. Possibly longer. Long enough to build a behavioral baseline. Isla exhaled slowly. Anger flickered across her face, then settled into something colder. "So everything I said here," she began. Sebastian shook his head. "Not everything," he said, "but enough." He moved to the table and pulled out one of her notebooks, flipping it open, scanning the pages. "From now on," he continued, "we assume they know what you've said, but not what you plan to do. That difference is everything." They sat down opposite each other, the same narrow table now transformed into an operational surface. Sebastian repositioned the chairs so they weren't facing each other directly. "Never sit like you're being interrogated," he said. "It's a habit people don't realize they have." Isla raised an eyebrow. "You planning to interrogate me?" she asked. Sebastian allowed himself a brief, humorless smile. "No," he said. "I'm teaching you how to survive one." He slid a blank page toward her. "Rule 1. Never answer the question you're asked. Answer the question that protects you." Isla picked up a pen. "That sounds like lying," she said. "It's framing," Sebastian replied. "Lies collapse under pressure. Frames redirected." He walked her through scenarios calmly, precisely. How to pause without appearing evasive. How to ask for clarification to buy time. How to repeat a question back incorrectly on purpose to force a correction that weakened the interrogator's control. Isla absorbed it quickly, faster than he expected. She didn't just listen. She adapted, pushed back, tested the logic. Sebastian watched her with a mix of professional respect and something more complicated. Beneath her sharpness was discipline. Beneath her defiance was focus. They worked through the night without noticing time passing, documents spread across the table, notes written and rewritten by hand. At some point, Isla leaned back and rubbed her eyes. "You've done this before," she said. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. "I've watched people break because they thought truth alone was enough," he said finally. "It never is." Isla studied him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. The question hung between them, heavier than any threat Hardy had issued. Sebastian met her gaze without flinching. "Because if I don't," he said, "I become complicit. And that's a line I won't cross again." Isla didn't ask what he meant by again. She understood enough not to push. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the quiet alliance solidifying inside a small apartment stripped of its illusions. They were no longer just hiding. They were preparing. The knock didn't come. That was the first sign something had gone wrong. Isla stood near the window, watching the street below through the narrow gap between the curtains, while Sebastian sat at the kitchen table, his attention fixed on the second hand of an old analog clock mounted crookedly on the wall. It ticked too loudly in the silence, each movement marking a narrowing window they hadn't chosen but were now trapped inside. When the building's intercom buzzed instead, sharp and insistent, Isla flinched. Sebastian was on his feet instantly, already moving, already calculating. He raised one finger to her, signaling stillness, and crossed the apartment in measured steps. He didn't answer the intercom. He unplugged it. "They want you to panic," he said quietly. "Panic creates consent." The buzzer sounded again, more aggressive this time. Isla's phone vibrated on the counter, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. Sebastian turned it face down without looking. "They're here," Isla whispered. Sebastian nodded. "Yes." He moved to the hallway closet and opened it, revealing a narrow service door Isla had always assumed was sealed. He pulled it open. Cool air rushed in from the stairwell beyond, carrying the scent of dust and old paint. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Isla asked. "Because you would have started relying on it," Sebastian replied. "And exits only work when they're forgotten." Voices rose outside the apartment door. Not shouting. Professional. Controlled. The kind of tone used by people who expected compliance without resistance. "Ms. Isla Moreau," a man called. "We just need a few minutes of your time." Isla felt her pulse spike. "They have lawyers with them," she said. Sebastian was already pulling on his coat. "Of course they do," he replied. "This isn't intimidation. It's documentation." He took her wrist gently but firmly. "Listen to me," he said. "They want a signature. A statement. Anything that creates a record of voluntary cooperation. You don't give them that." The voices outside grew closer. A key slid into the lock. Someone had authorization. Sebastian didn't react outwardly. He guided Isla toward the service door, opening it just wide enough for them to slip through. "Stay behind me," he said. The stairwell was narrow, lit by a single flickering bulb. As they descended, Sebastian counted steps under his breath, not because it mattered, but because it steadied him. Behind them, the apartment door opened. The voices stopped. Someone noticed the absence too quickly. "Now," Sebastian said, and they moved faster. They exited through a side door into an alley that smelled of rain and oil. The city was louder here, less controlled, which worked in their favor. They blended into it, walking at first, then turning corners without pattern, breaking lines of sight. Isla's breath came fast. Adrenaline sharpened her senses, made everything too vivid. "They'll follow," she said. "Yes," Sebastian agreed. "But not directly. They don't want witnesses." They ducked into a metro entrance, then out another exit 2 stops later without boarding a train. Sebastian changed their pace, slowed them down, forced normalcy onto their movements. At a crowded intersection, he stopped abruptly. "Hand me your bag," he said. Isla hesitated only a second before obeying. Sebastian stepped toward a trash bin, removed a notebook from her bag, tore out several pages, and dropped the rest inside. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Reducing leverage," he replied. "They don't know what you have, but they know you have something. Confusion buys time." They continued until Isla's legs ached and her fears settled into something heavier, something more focused. Finally, Sebastian guided her into a parking garage and stopped near the back wall. He leaned against the concrete, eyes scanning the entrance. "This is where it becomes real," he said. "From this point on, there is no version of this where you walk back into your apartment like nothing happened." Isla met his gaze. Her fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. "I know," she said. "I crossed that line when I didn't sign." Sebastian nodded. "Good." Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, unrelated but close enough to raise the stakes. Sebastian straightened. "They'll regroup," he said, "and they'll escalate." Isla swallowed. "So what do we do?" Sebastian looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time allowed the weight of responsibility to settle fully on his shoulders. "We stop running," he said, "but we choose where we stand." The drive out of the city was tense, each streetlight a potential witness, each shadow a question mark. Sebastian kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes forward, though his mind replayed the scene at Isla's apartment in sharp, looping detail. He could still hear the echo of the voices, the professional calm, the precise threat hidden beneath polite tones. Isla sat beside him, silent, notebook clutched against her chest like armor. She hadn't spoken since they left the alley, but Sebastian knew the wheels were turning in her head, dissecting, recalculating, planning. That was why she was dangerous. That was why he trusted her. They reached the outskirts of the city, the streetlights giving way to industrial shadows, the hum of traffic replaced by the occasional drone of distant machinery. Sebastian guided the car to a deserted parking lot behind an abandoned warehouse, shutting off the engine with deliberate silence. They stayed in the car for several minutes, listening to the world, catching their breaths, waiting for the sense of exposure to fade. Finally, Sebastian reached across, resting a hand lightly on Isla's notebook. "We need the originals," he said. His voice was low, almost casual, but it carried weight. "Without them, Hardy can't be forced to move. Without them, you're a target, and I'm compromised." Isla shifted, nodding. "I know. That's why I brought the archive. But it's encrypted. The files are worthless unless we get the keys from the old office." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "The old office is a risk," he said. "Security's tighter than you think. Cameras, motion sensors, backup protocols. Anyone who's ever walked through those halls can still be tracked if we trip a single alert." He paused. "But it's our only option." Isla's fingers tightened around the notebook. "Then we go tonight," she said. Sebastian studied her. There was determination in her eyes, but also an unspoken acknowledgement of fear. "Good," he replied. "We leave in 30 minutes. No calls, no digital communication, no deviation from the plan." They prepared quickly, gathering essential items: gloves, flash drives, minimal tools for bypassing locks. Every item was chosen for discretion, for speed, for survival. As they moved toward the car, Sebastian reviewed the route in his head, mentally mapping guards, blind spots, and potential exits. Isla didn't speak, but she didn't need to. He knew she was cataloging the details just as thoroughly, noting every possibility, every contingency. The drive to the countryside was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional click of Sebastian shifting gears. He noticed Isla's gaze flick toward the rearview mirror every few moments, assessing, scanning. She didn't trust the streets, the world, or anyone in it. Not entirely. That mistrust made her vigilant. That vigilance kept them alive. They arrived at the old archive building just before midnight, the moon casting pale light over cracked windows and rusted gates. Sebastian parked at the edge of the property, far enough to remain unseen, close enough for rapid access. "Stay close," he whispered as they approached the building. The lock on the door was old, simple. Sebastian bypassed it with minimal noise, motioning for Isla to follow. Inside, the air smelled of dust, mildew, and old paper. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, their contents untouched for years. Isla moved with care, opening drawers only as necessary, avoiding the faint squeak of rusted metal. Sebastian's attention was split between her movements and the faint hum of surveillance equipment he could sense but not yet see. Minutes stretched, each one laden with the threat of discovery. Finally, Isla located the flash drive she needed. Sebastian watched her hands, ready to intercept, ready to protect, ready to act if the plan failed. Just as she reached for it, a faint sound echoed from the far corner, the metallic scrape of shoes on concrete. Sebastian's heart rate didn't increase. Instantly, he was on alert, body tense, mind calculating options. "Hide the drive," he whispered. Isla tucked it into her coat, keeping her hands visible but still. They pressed against the shadows, bodies pressed to the wall, breath shallow. The footsteps drew closer, then passed by the edge of their hiding spot. Sebastian exhaled silently. "They're looking for someone else," he murmured. For now. Isla let the tension drain slightly from her posture, but didn't relax completely. Sebastian knew better than to allow it. Every second here was borrowed time. They moved to the exit, retracing their path through the archive, careful to disturb nothing, leave no trace. Once outside, the cold night air hit them like a promise. "We got it," Isla whispered. Sebastian nodded, scanning the perimeter before they returned to the car. "Yes, but we're not safe yet. The drive is worthless until we can decrypt it, and every second they realize it's gone increases the pressure on us." He slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine. Isla didn't say a word, didn't need to. Their mission had escalated, the stakes now higher than ever, and both understood that there was no room for error. In the distance, a security vehicle moved along the property line, lights scanning. Sebastian adjusted their route, taking a longer, indirect path to avoid surveillance. The night became a study in patience and precision. Each turn, each shadow, each moment a potential decision that could mean freedom or capture. And all the while, the tension between them, unspoken and charged, drew them closer in a bond forged not by desire but by necessity. By the time they returned to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, dawn was only an hour away, and exhaustion weighed on them. But the flash drive in Isla's coat reminded them that the fight was far from over. The old port was silent except for the occasional drip of water from rusted beams overhead and the faint lapping of waves against the pier pilings. Sebastian and Isla moved along the cracked concrete like shadows, steps measured, eyes scanning. The night air smelled of salt and diesel, mixing with the faint metallic tang of rust. Isla's coat flapped lightly in the breeze, but her movements remained precise, calculated, controlled. Sebastian followed closely, each of his footsteps echoing slightly, a reminder that the world outside was unaware but always listening. "This place hasn't changed in 20 years, Isla whispered, as if saying it aloud would anchor them to a time before the chaos. Sebastian didn't respond. He was already crouched near the edge of the dock, checking the perimeter, noting escape routes, sight lines, and the occasional blinking light that indicated some security system long since abandoned but possibly still functional. "We need to talk strategy," he said finally, voice low. Isla nodded, keeping her tone equally subdued. "We can't just dump this data without control," she said, the notebook in her hands illuminated by the soft glow of her phone. "If Hardy gets wind before we do, he'll cover every angle and ruin us both." Sebastian's gaze softened for a brief moment as he looked at her, not because of warmth, but because he had learned in the past hours that understanding someone's thought process could be as powerful as any weapon. "We execute a controlled release," he said. "We stagger the files, use multiple channels. We make it look like a leak, but with timing that protects you and legally isolates me. Everything else is a distraction. Isla studied him, nodding. She had already begun mentally running through his plan, noting potential weak points, contingencies, and the tiniest cracks. Sebastian noticed the way her fingers tapped lightly against the notebook cover, signaling her calculation. He allowed himself a faint smile. "Good," he said, "because we don't get a second chance at this. One mistake and Hardy turns the city against us before anyone knows the truth." The tension between them was no longer just operational. It pulsed beneath the surface like electricity in a storm. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the pier, watching the water reflect the faint glow of distant industrial lights. Sebastian's hand brushed against Isla's as he handed her the first set of encrypted flash drives. Neither flinched. The contact was deliberate, charged, but not yet intimacy. It was trust measured in microseconds, the kind born from mutual dependence under imminent threat. "If they catch us here," Isla whispered, "we're dead before anyone even knows we exist." Sebastian nodded. "Which is why we disappear after each step. Timing is everything." Isla exhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the cold night air. "How do we know we can trust anyone else?" she asked quietly, almost rhetorically. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. He crouched, scanning the shadows, imagining every movement, every observer, every variable that could jeopardize their plan. Then he spoke. "We don't. That's why we only trust each other and the channels we control." Isla's lips pressed together briefly, a sign of acknowledgement and resolve. Sebastian straightened and stepped back, giving her space but keeping close. "Once the data is staged, you go live from a location only you know. I execute legal separation protocols to ensure Hardy can't trace anything back to me. Simultaneously, the media receives corroborated evidence, forcing his hands legally and publicly. Timing, secrecy, precision." Isla studied him again, her sharp eyes registering the layers of his calculations, the way he anticipated consequences. "And if he anticipates our timing?" she asked. "Then we adapt," Sebastian said. "We adapt faster than he can react. That's the only way we survive this intact." They moved together down the pier, taking alternate routes, scanning the horizon, blending with shadows, practicing the choreography of movement that would later look spontaneous, but now had to be perfect. Isla felt the strain in her muscles, the constant readiness, but beneath it, an odd clarity settled over her mind. They were partners in the purest sense, not because of desire, not yet, but because the stakes had elevated trust into necessity. Sebastian, noticing her focus, allowed a momentary glance toward her, assessing the resolve in her posture, the steady breath, the controlled panic. "Tonight," he said, breaking the near silence for the first time in minutes, "we set the conditions. Tomorrow, everything changes. But tonight, we control the chaos." Isla nodded once, her eyes fixed on the shadowed waters stretching beyond the dock. "Then let's do it," she said. For the first time in days, neither of them questioned the other's commitment. They had no allies, no margin for error, only each other and the plan. The night seemed to pause around them, a fragile interlude before the storm. Every step they took from that moment was measured, every breath controlled, every glance deliberate. And in that tension, a silent bond solidified, born not from proximity, but from mutual risk, mutual trust, and the shared certainty that only by staying together could they hope to survive the coming reckoning. The first signs appeared as subtle, almost imperceptible disruptions in Isla's routine. Emails she hadn't sent, calls she hadn't made, messages that vanished before she could read them. At first, she thought it was a glitch, an error in the network, until her favorite cafe called to confirm that someone had tried to use her loyalty card, entering the address of her apartment as the billing location. Panic rose in her chest, but Sebastian's presence was a tether. He didn't overreact, didn't panic. He analyzed. He planned. And yet, inside, he felt the tightening coil of anger and helplessness that he had worked so hard to suppress. "They're getting bolder," he said, voice low, as he scanned the live feed from a camera Isla had managed to keep operational in her apartment. The image was grainy, showing two figures circling near the building, unremarkable except for the intent in their movements. Isla clenched her fists, They want me scared, she whispered. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, not to comfort, but to anchor. Yes, he said finally, but we don't give them what they want. Fear is a tool, and tools are neutral until wielded. Hours passed as they monitored, planned, and adjusted. Every unexpected movement outside, every unusual email, every shadow became data. Sebastian moved with a precision born of experience, balancing concern for Isla with the imperative to maintain the operational plan. He could feel the tension coiling in her like a spring ready to snap, and he knew one wrong word or misstep could unravel everything. Around midnight, the escalation arrived. Isla returned from a brief errand, unaware that she was being followed. Sebastian had insisted she travel in a nondescript vehicle, in a route carefully mapped, but the moment she stepped onto the street, he saw the figures approach from the corner of his eye. His reaction was immediate. He stepped from his shadow, blocking their view, creating distance between Isla and the threat. The assailants hesitated for a second, reassessing, calculating whether intervention was necessary. Sebastian didn't wait. He moved with controlled aggression, his voice a sharp command in the night. Back off. Now. The men froze, recognition flickering in their eyes, as if they knew this wasn't just any man. He didn't touch them, didn't escalate physically beyond the minimum. But the authority, the precision in his movement, forced their retreat. Sebastian's breathing was steady, almost unnaturally so. But inside, a storm raged. His control over the situation had prevented immediate harm, but he knew this was only a warning. Isla, shaken but unharmed, stood silently beside him. Sebastian turned toward her, eyes dark, unreadable. You see why I don't stay in the open, he said quietly. Because the moment I do, everything you are, everything we've worked for, is at risk. She looked at him, her anger mixed with awe. They would have hurt me, she said. They didn't. You stopped them. Sebastian shook his head. It's not about stopping them. It's about surviving long enough to make them irrelevant. The moment I intervene physically every time, I put you, me, and the entire plan at risk. He crouched slightly, gesturing for her to follow him into a nearby alley. They moved silently, keeping to shadows, eyes scanning, listening. Every action counts, he whispered. Every misstep is magnified under hardy scrutiny. He doesn't make mistakes. We cannot afford to. Isla exhaled slowly, allowing her tension to ease, but she didn't speak. Words weren't necessary. She had seen, felt, and understood. The night pressed in around them, thick and unforgiving, but in that darkness, a bond crystallized. Sebastian's restraint, his meticulous care for her safety, spoke volumes beyond the operational plan. And while the threat loomed, the fear sharpened their focus, forced them to move in near-perfect unison. Every glance, every step, every silent command was calibrated. By the time they returned to the safe house, Isla's pulse had slowed, though her mind still raced. Sebastian placed the encrypted flash drives on the table. Tonight confirmed something critical, he said. Hardy's reach is extensive. His methods are escalating. But so is our resolve. You've survived. That's the only victory that matters right now. Isla nodded, looking at him. In that shared silence, they both recognized that the threat was no longer abstract. It had taken physical form, touched the edges of their lives, and forced an intimacy born of mutual dependence. Sebastian allowed himself the briefest of looks at her, something almost vulnerable slipping through his otherwise impenetrable demeanor. We're past the point of pretending this is a game, he said. From now on, every step is deliberate, every risk measured, and every second, we watch each other's backs. Isla met his gaze, her determination mirrored in his. The night outside remained indifferent, but inside the small room, a silent pact was sealed. They would face the storm together, and in doing so, they had become something more than allies in a fight. They had become each other's lifeline. The room was dimly lit, the soft hum of the city outside a distant backdrop to the storm inside. Sebastian and Isla sat close together on the edge of the mattress, knees brushing, fingers occasionally meeting, tracing, retreating, as if the contact itself held both promise and danger. The night pressed around them, thick with the knowledge of what tomorrow could bring. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and it could be the end, not just of the plan, but of their lives. Isla's voice broke the silence first, low, almost a whisper. Do you think we'll make it through? Sebastian's gaze was steady, locked on hers, every line of his face taut with concern and concentration. We will, he said, though the certainty was a choice, not a guarantee. But not because we're lucky. Because we've prepared, anticipated, and adapted. Because we moved together. Her hand found his, fingers interlocking without hesitation. The simple touch was electric, grounding, reminding them both of the human stakes beneath the operational layer. I've never trusted anyone like this, Isla admitted, voice trembling with emotion and fear. Sebastian's other hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it carefully behind her ear. Nor have I, he replied. Trust is the only weapon we have that can't be confiscated or traced. They sat in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of their confession and the night settle between them. Then, almost instinctively, they leaned closer. The kiss was tentative at first, a soft testing of boundaries, but soon became more urgent, more desperate. It was a release of all the fear, the tension, the adrenaline, and the knowledge that the world outside could strip it away in an instant. Each touch, each sigh, each heartbeat was magnified by the looming danger. Sebastian's hand moved along her back, feeling the curve of her spine, the subtle tension of muscle coiled from anxiety. Isla's hands pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid but controlled beat of his heart, a mirror of her own. Words were unnecessary. Every glance, every brush of skin, every controlled breath communicated volumes that language could never capture. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the silent war being waged in a small, nondescript room. The threats, the ultimatums, the shadowed agents of Hardy, all seemed to fade in the intensity of this fragile moment. And yet, even as passion and trust intertwined, both were acutely aware of the ticking clock. We'll need every second of focus tomorrow, Sebastian murmured against her temple, voice rough but calm. Isla nodded, pressing closer. I know, she whispered. But tonight, I just want to be here with you. Not thinking, not calculating. Just here. He held her tighter, a protective anchor against the storm they knew was coming. Outside, a distant siren wailed, then faded, irrelevant, yet symbolic. Tomorrow, the culmination of months of planning, deception, and courage would arrive. Tonight, in the fragile sanctuary of this room, Sebastian and Isla allowed themselves a reprieve, a fleeting human connection that neither money, power, nor threat could sever. Their breathing synchronized, hearts pounding in tandem. They clung to the moment, drawing strength from each other. Every touch, every whispered word, every glance was a preparation, a silent rehearsal for the battle ahead. And in that desperate intimacy, they found a clarity neither had known before, that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, unyielding, unwavering, and bound by a trust forged in fire and fear, a bond that would carry them through the storm that awaited at dawn. The boardroom was colder than either of them expected, a cavernous space dominated by long polished tables and the faint scent of expensive leather. Sebastian stepped through the door first, his suit impeccable, every movement precise, every step measured. Isla followed behind, staying in the shadows until the exact moment of exposure. They had rehearsed this countless times, yet the tension in the room made each heartbeat echo loudly in their chests. Hardy sat at the head of the table, calm, collected, the image of untouchable authority. But Sebastian could see the micro-expressions, the twitch of an eye, the slight tightening of a jaw, that betrayed unease. Good evening, Sebastian began, his voice smooth, carrying the weight of both authority and challenge. I trust everyone is comfortable. There was a polite murmur, some nods, but the air was taut with expectation. Sebastian's hand brushed a concealed recorder in his pocket, ensuring it captured every word, every subtle admission. Isla, stationed remotely in a live broadcast studio, had her voice ready, her fingers poised over the keyboard, prepared to transmit the first wave of evidence the moment Sebastian gave the signal. Hardy smiled thinly, confident, until Sebastian casually set a folder on the table. This contains the original documentation, verified, authenticated, he said. Everything anyone has claimed, everything you've tried to hide. It's all here. The room froze. Hardy's smile faltered imperceptibly. He tried to maintain composure, but Sebastian's calm dominance forced his attention entirely onto the legal and ethical implications of his own actions. "And the public record?" someone asked, uncertainty creeping into their tone. Sebastian lifted a hand, signaling patience. "Already live," he said. Across the city, Isla's broadcast began, the studio lights casting a harsh glow across her determined features. The network she had hacked moments before transmitted the files simultaneously, every encrypted piece of evidence flowing to journalists, media outlets, and legal entities. Hardy's composure broke. The first murmur of panic flickered in his eyes as he realized the trap had been perfectly executed. Sebastian watched him, steady, unyielding, and for the first time, allowed the full weight of his decision to settle. He had risked his career, his reputation, and his legal license to bring Hardy down, but in doing so, he had protected Isla and the truth. Hardy's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages, calls, alerts, all ignored. He looked around the boardroom, seeking a lifeline, but the room was silent, judgmental, witnessing the collapse of his carefully constructed world. Law enforcement agents, already tipped off by the simultaneous broadcast, entered with quiet efficiency. Hardy was cuffed, his protests echoing off the high ceilings, but no one paid attention except to document every word, every gesture. Sebastian stepped back, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over him. Isla's voice came through the secure channel, calm, controlled, yet tinged with adrenaline. "It's done," she said. "You did it." He allowed himself the faintest of smiles, though the exhaustion weighed heavy in his bones. "We did it," he corrected. Outside, the city's first morning lights spilled across rooftops, a reminder that life continued, indifferent but awaiting their next move. Sebastian's legal license was suspended, a price he had expected. He had sacrificed his professional standing for the truth and for Isla. But as he met her gaze in the studio feed, that loss seemed trivial. The danger had passed, the threat neutralized, and the bond between them, tested, refined, and solidified through fire and fear, was undeniable. Later, in a small, nondescript cafe far from the corporate skyscrapers, Sebastian and Isla sat across from each other, hands brushing across the table. No threats, no ultimatums, no hidden agendas, just the quiet understanding of survival, trust, and something deeper, something real. Sebastian exhaled, breaking the silence. "So what now?" Isla smiled, a flicker of relief and playful energy returning to her features. "Now," she said, "we live. And maybe, just maybe, you finally get that PR job you've been avoiding." He chuckled, the first genuine laugh in weeks. "Then I suppose we're free," he replied. Their eyes met, lingering, no pretense, no disguise. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the storm that had passed, of the chaos tamed, and of the bond forged between two people who had dared to stand together when the world demanded silence. And in that quiet victory, Sebastian and Isla found something even more powerful than the law, more enduring than fear, the certainty that they could face anything, as long as they faced it together. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.